The challenge is that this magic that we get to experience at the beginning, because of that difference, leads to conflict as intimacy increases. And so as we get closer to this person, the difference that we loved often becomes the thing that we hate the most.
Even if you decide to stay, or even if you decide to go, you may do so while at the same time having a part of you that actually holds the other side. If you think that the decision is 100% perfect, no doubt, no hesitation, then it's a setup. If you leave, you need to be able to leave while experiencing the loss of some things that may have been good, even if it's just the dream of what was. If you stay, you need to be able to grieve the part of you that will never know what it would have been like if you'd actually left. Esther Perel. Welcome to the What We Learned Project, where we share our most important life lessons and our struggles to overcome our challenges in a crazy world so you don't have to go through them yourself. We'll take you with us on our journey of growth, expansion, sometimes failure, and sometimes success. Learn and grow with us on the way. In today's episode, we'll explore the age-old question of, do I stay or do I go in a romantic relationship? How do you know if you're in the right relationship, but it's time to grow, both independently and together, or you're in the wrong one and it's time to grow on your own? Can you even know? We'll be exploring how your underlying needs and whether you can meet them for one another are at the root of your choice, and so much more. I'm one of your hosts, Micah Cranman, and I've been an entrepreneur for the last 2.5 decades. In early 2023, I sold my business after nearly 20 years and am interested in what it means to live a conscious, joyful, awakened, and abundant life. And this podcast is my effort, along with my co-host, Alan Bittaker, to share that exploration with the world. You can find me on Instagram at Tatonka, that's Tatonkuh, if you'd like to learn more and follow me. And I'm here with, as I said, my co-host, Dr. Alan Bittaker. Alan is by training a doctor of chiropractic and is currently practicing as a transformational coach with a background in a variety of modalities to support his clients. If what we talk about helps you uncover an area where you'd like to grow, he's available for one-on-one support through one of his group containers. To learn more, visit him at Dr. Alan Bittaker on Instagram or Dr. Alan, that's 2 L's, .co. Let's dive in.
Why today's episode? So one of the things that we're doing with this podcast, the What We Learned project, is looking at where are we struggling in our own lives and what are we learning in order to be able to overcome that challenge or to navigate that challenge. And I have had the blessing of a beautiful relationship that has spanned about 6 months now, and we are navigating what looks like at this moment a likely separation, but doing so with a lot of care and a lot of love and a lot of respect. And I wanted to vulnerably share my own process of how I'm thinking about the choice to stay or the choice to go, and let you guys in on what I've learned and what I'm learning. And I have no idea if this is the right approach. I humbly submit my learnings to your review. So that's kind of the intro. So with all of that being said, let's dive in to that particular question. So unless you have anything else to add, Alan, I'll just dive in.
Yeah. I'll add something real quick. And I just want to honor you and honor kind of the approach that we're taking here with what we learned and what we're learning is such there's a gift of the masculine that I see coming through, which is around integrity, right? And there's this integrous piece of like humility of like, also we don't fucking know all the answers, and we're moving through with certainty, but there's this level of like, this is where we're at with it. So I just wanted to reflect that and honor that piece, because I think it's pretty unique in the culture today. And I feel like, Micah, you're someone that's really bringing that through, and I really honor that, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So do I stay or do I go? I think this is one of the hardest questions that any person can answer in a love relationship, and sometimes in other important relationships, whether it's a business relationship or a friendship, but particularly in these love relationships, because I think as human beings, we have this fundamental wiring to deeply desire companionship, love, intimacy, safety. There's so many things that we get, so many needs that we get met in our relationships and in our partnerships. And so when something's not working, it can be one of the most challenging things in the world to navigate. Few things can tear a person up like that. And at the same time, it can also be one of the times where we feel the least clarity, because we have so many complex and often conflicted emotions. And so what I wanted to do is sort of share the way that I'm thinking about it to support anyone that's having trouble with finding clarity, just by sharing kind of the process that I went through to think about this for myself. And I think one like really simple heuristic that you can use is that we're going to categorize relationships into 3 different types. You have a loving, healthy, and nourishing relationship. You have a loving and unfulfilling relationship. So let me just back up. Type 1, loving, healthy, and nourishing, is kind of, I think it's what we all dream of. It's what we all want. And loving and unfulfilling is often where we find ourselves, where there's a tremendous amount of love with this human being, but it's not working in some way, shape, or form. And it doesn't feel good to remain in the relationship. Maybe some aspects, but some aspects not so much. And then the third kind is an unloving and unhealthy relationship, which you might call toxic or abusive. I just want to say straight out of the gates that this podcast is not for people in that third category. I'm not qualified to talk to you about how you should navigate that. I'm not qualified to help you identify that. What I'll say is, like, if your relationship involves abuse or addiction, like, it's probably time to leave and get some professional support. But we're not going to dive into that. We're going to make a fundamental assumption that the relationship that you're in is probably in that second category, a loving and unfulfilling relationship, which is having you in that place where you're trying to decide, do I stay or do I go? Or can we move the relationship into one that's loving and healthy and nourishing, and, evolve it into the one that you want. So that's what I'll say kind of as the like overall framing. How do we get from that loving yet unfulfilling relationship into the loving, healthy, and fulfilling relationship that we want? Anything you want to add on that, Alan, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Not really. Not at this point. That all seems really clear to me.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So I also want to share one of the things that I learned in this relationship that has been such a blessing for me and has been incredibly supportive to my understanding of what a relationship is fundamentally about. And this model of thinking about relationship comes from nonviolent communication, if you've ever heard of it, but I heard about it from a book called Loving Conflict by a guy named Max Rivers. And the essence, the essential idea is that being in a relationship is about fulfilling each other's needs. And we're attracted to people who fulfill our needs, especially people who fulfill our needs in ways that we find difficult to do for ourselves. So as an example, maybe we're, very structured, very hardworking, very focused on our career, let's say, and we find this incredibly deep attraction to someone who is more free-spirited, who's more playful, who's more vibrant, because when we're with them, we have the experience of this need for play and aliveness and joy to get met, as an example. And maybe they have a deep sense of satisfaction because it's hard for them to meet their own needs for stability, consistency, reliability, and so forth. The challenge is that this magic that we get to experience at the beginning, because of that difference, leads to conflict as intimacy increases. And so as we get closer to this person, the difference that we loved often becomes the thing that we hate the most, or the thing that creates conflict or the most frustration. And the central question to answer is this permanent or is this temporary? And if there was that difference, and it gave you joy once, is it possible to get to the other side, right? Or said more simply, can we meet each other's needs? So when we talk about needs, or this is a huge, there are books written on this topic, so it's beyond the scope of this conversation, but we're going to talk about it a little bit. But what I'll say is there are some key areas that are really important, that are centered around uncovering whether or not you think realistically you can meet one another's needs. And we can dive into those.
Yeah. I would love to hear what you have to say about that. What I'm thinking right now is I'm thinking about something like, as crazy as it sounds, like our parents' generation, I think actually do, and maybe they're just more mature at this point where they're at, but I see older couples sometimes who have a level of acceptance of their partner and their quirky way that is so opposite from their center of gravity. And so I'm just kind of like noticing that in the moment about how that's like an evolution from where I feel like I'm at. And I'm feeling inspired about that.
Yeah. For me, this was kind of a revolutionary idea to wrap my head around the fact that, the source of my attraction is also the source of my conflict that I'm experiencing in relationship. And if I expect my partner to be like me, then what I'm actually trying to do is get them to be someone that I won't be attracted to, because then there will be no difference. And it's this kind of crazy mindfuck when you really think about it, because that's our tendency. It's like, be more like me. I'm right.
You're pretty awesome though, bro.
Thank you, my friend. Again, he's again with the cupping of the bowls.
You must really like your balls being cupped.
I mean, you can infer what you want from that.
I'm gonna have to try that.
Please don't without asking first, okay?
Okay.
Generally, it's not from your gender that I prefer the cupping, but I appreciate the offer. It's sweet of you.
I wasn't offering. I was actually I was saying that for myself.
Oh,
but yes.
Got it. Okay. All right. A little miscommunication there. So let's talk about like there are categories of these, like categories where things go awry and our needs go unmet. And often initial attraction, with someone, I think one of the common patterns that plays out with people is we have this initial attraction that's either physical or emotional, but we haven't really investigated, whether or not long term there's a realistic chance that we're going to be able to meet each other's needs. And so, kind of like the high level, super rational thing to do is to just look at that shit. And we don't like to because we're sold the romantic story that love is enough. And in my experience, love's awesome. And it is not enough. It is the starting point. So let's talk about the different reasons, and then we're going to dive into them in a little bit. So the first reason that you might have a challenge meeting each other's needs is misalignment about the relationship's purpose. Then there's potentially different values, a lack of understanding each other's needs. So this is sort of a communication challenge, meaning you may think you're asking for what you need, but you're not. Or you're not asking and expecting them to know psychically or intuitively. There may just be a fundamental inability or unwillingness to meet one another's needs. And there's also the possibility that one or either of you feels unsafe in the relationship, either because of something that's happened between you or potentially because of unresolved trauma, or often because of both of those things. So we're going to dive into those. But before we do, I think it's also really important to make a distinction that for me was also revolutionary that Max talks about, which is the distinction between needs and strategies. So what he describes as a need is actually a physical, embodied sensory experience. So, for example, when I notice that my throat is dry and I maybe feel a little bit tired or fatigued and there's a little bit of headache that's going on and maybe a little bit of irritability, that might actually be, that's a need that we would call thirst. I'm experiencing thirst. And that's a perfectly natural, normal need. And every need, when you get down to the root level, not the thoughts, not the conceptualization, is actually an embodied sensation that generally is experienced as some kind of pain or discomfort. And when we have a need, then we utilize strategies for their fulfillment. So one strategy to get my need for thirst met would be to get up and get myself a glass of water. Another strategy might be to ask my partner, "Hey boo, will you get me a glass of water?" Another strategy might be to drink a bottle of champagne. And all of these strategies are going to have different effects, different outcomes. They may involve others. They may involve only me. But there are a variety of different strategies that we all use to get our needs met. And what we don't understand is that the need is always valid. It's always valid that when we feel anxious, for example, we want to get back into a more regulated nervous system state. We want to feel calm again. But the strategy may be a bad one. For example, yelling at our partner and telling them whenever they do X, it makes us anxious, versus saying, "Hey, I notice I'm feeling anxious. I would really love some support." Those are very different strategies with a very different result, for example. So part of what there is to do is everything else that we're going to talk about is a lot of dialogue actually around strategy and the way strategies may be different, and seeing if there's enough flexibility for you to find strategies that are compatible and suffice to meet one another's needs. Is that landing,
Yeah.
Alan? How does that track for you?
it tracks really good. I want to kind of go back to the list of what you're talking about of
Yeah.
like not feeling safe, unresolved trauma. How do I communicate my needs?
Yeah.
Uh, I think those are probably the lingering three, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
like, uh, we can have a conversation and get refined on the purpose of our relationship. Like, I think that's an overarching, like, essential.
Mm-hmm.
But the three of like not sure how to communicate, which is kind of what you're speaking to around
Mm-hmm.
strategies, and not feeling safe and unresolved trauma, I feel like that is, the word trauma has been really, there's different levels and different intensities.
Mm-hmm.
And one trauma that I know about that really, really points to this is like having the trauma of rejection from asking for your needs so much that you begin to numb what you need and you become
Yep.
unaware. And so
Yep.
I think I would love to at some point really get into the unraveling process of, I feel like that's the biggest point of growth for most people, myself included, is in like that I feel thirsty thing.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I draw that conclusion for from the discomfort in my throat, right? So it's like I'm feeling uncomfortable. How well can we even notice that we feel uncomfortable
Right.
versus just subconsciously or conditioned reaction to our discomfort? It's like, how do we slow that process down to really
Yeah.
get curious about the discomfort and then learn what that actually means
Mm-hmm.
for me or you.
Yeah, cool. I love that. I really want to dive into that. Before we do, I want to spend like 2 minutes on the purpose of the relationship because I think it can cut through a tremendous amount of noise if people have not actually looked at this and simplify things in a way that almost none of the other things that we're going to discuss can. A lot of them are the other categories are sort of deep rabbit holes of tremendous amount of work. And I think that's actually the purpose of relationship is our growth and expansion, not just our love. But so if you'll humor me, let's just touch in on the alignment piece a little bit, and then let's circle back to what you're talking about, because I think you're on the money. That is where I think the vast majority of people experience pain. So these are kind of just the key points to hit when you think about what your relationship is for and are you aligned. So what is the ultimate intention of the relationship? Is it about casual connection? Is it about partnership? If you're ethically non-monogamous or polyamorous, are you available for a secondary partnership? Is it about marriage? Do you want to have family and kids? You would be amazed at how many people spend a year or two in a relationship who have not discussed this because the sex is great and they have fun together. And then all of a sudden, when there's real intimacy, shit breaks down. So I think really clarifying that is super important. I think if marriage and family is the intention, what kind of model are you going to use to run the family, right? Like, what kind of partnership will that be? Is there going to be equality of effort and contribution across the various domains? Are you each going to have separate roles? What about money? Like, who's going to pay for what? How do you want that to work? If you already have kids, what do you want this individual's role to be in their life? If it being ethically non-monogamous is quite, it's becoming more and more common. And so the one question for those individuals is, how will you relate or not with others? And I actually would make the point that I think this is a really important thing, even for quote unquote monogamous couples, because in truth, there's a spectrum. On one side, there's, I don't want you to look at or think about another human being of the appropriate gender to which you are attracted. And if you do, you are breaching the sanctity of our relationship. And then on the other side is you do you, I do me, and however you feel about it and however I feel about it is my responsibility. And it's a huge range. And so even if you intend to be quote unquote monogamous, it's also important to establish, like, is it cool if I cuddle with my, if you're a woman in a heterosexual relationship, is it cool if I cuddle with my guy friends? Can I have is it okay if I have an emotionally intimate relationship with somebody of the opposite sex? How does that make you feel? Seems like a small one, but I think it's actually a really, really big one, and can generate a lot of pain because we all have different needs for I should say more accurately, we all have different strategies for how we want to feel safe and what that means for how we would like for our partner or partners to behave. So I think this is like a really actually kind of a critical one for people to like have a conversation and actually talk about it. And then I think there's one more piece, which is there a higher purpose for the relationship that comes before each individual? Meaning maybe both of you are deeply committed to your relationship to God and you want God to be first. Or maybe both of you are deeply committed to doing service work in other countries or, serving a shared mission or vision. And maybe not.
Yeah, Micah, can I paint a picture here
around absolutely.
Purpose. I just want to let this prayer out into the world and offer a high standard for relationship around the philosophy and what I believe to be an epic opportunity in relationship is to purify and liberate the parts of us that hold us back in life through another person, where there's so much access to intimacy and compassion and being seen by another human being in a way that we can get a more true reflection of maybe what we might believe about ourselves from another person and start to really like own that from ourselves, own that for ourselves. Yeah, I just see that as a really epic, beautiful opportunity in relationship, is offering loving compassion and curiosity from another person where we can't see that for ourselves, and helping that to liberate parts of us that are bound in fear and avoidance, ignorance, grasping, those types of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it also can, much to our dismay, cut the other way too, where, I have this sort of model, this underlying model that we're all actually insane. And we have a really easy time seeing what we perceive as the other person's insanity, their stuff, right? We all have it. We all have trauma. We all have wounding. We all have these patterns of behavior that from the outside to someone else's judgment look crazy. And and one of the like beautiful gifts is if in relationship you can find a way to offer that reflection lovingly and with grace to each other, like, hey boo, like this is a thing and it's not working for me and it doesn't diminish my love for you, and also I'm not okay with it. It can be really difficult to receive that, and it can be really difficult to offer that, but it is one of the great opportunities of intimate relating. And I think that's a really good segue into what you were referencing earlier, kind of safety, trauma, and so forth. And I think just to put a pin in what I was saying with the different dimensions of compatibility, like it all traces back to needs, and there are so many dimensions it would be impossible to list all of them. But and it may be unreasonable to expect that there's any one person that's going to meet all of those needs. But the things that you hold most deeply, really take the time to look at that for yourself, with yourself and with your partner or potential partner, whether you're in the beginning stages or in the uncoupling process, because there's an opportunity to learn for whatever comes next. So that having been said, I would love to dive in to, into the conversation around safety, trauma, understanding one another's needs, and so forth. So I open the floor to you, to kind of just jump in.
Beautiful. So
And those.
What I hear, around the whole conversation actually is, how responsible am I for meeting my needs, and how responsible is a partner for meeting my needs?
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that there's a big question mark for me there. And like when you even introduce the idea of relationship is around meeting each other's needs, there's a part of me that like calls bullshit on that. And at the end of the day, I think it's, there's a lot of truth to that. I think it is true.
Tell me more. Tell me more about the bullshit. Tell me more. Tell me why I'm wrong. Because this is the best I got so far, but I don't know if it's true. So tell.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that you're wrong. I'm just saying like here is it's on a spectrum, right? And
sure,
and it's on the same spectrum that you already described in some ways of like, my safety is your responsibility.
Sure.
Right. And then on the other end of the spectrum is, you have nothing to do with me feeling safe. Right.
Yeah.
So there's like the quote that I like, or the phrase that I like around the blending of the two, is holding ourselves and leaning in to connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful point. And to clarify, I think it would be easy to misinterpret me saying that being in relationship is about meeting each other's needs as this sort of like transactional, like I scratch your back, you scratch mine sort of a model. And I'm only here because of what you're going to give me. And that, I think, sort of cheapens the whole thing, because I think there's some intuitive part of us that knows that that's not true, that there's something deeper. But even that can be placed in its own category of needs. And what I mean by that is, I actually have this deeply felt need to offer and give love, because it feels so good to me to love another human being with all of my heart and all of my soul. And that fulfills me to offer love and to be loving. And it fulfills me to be in the kind of relationship where there's grace and care offered, and in the kind of relationship where I get to grow, and maybe in the place where I have an expectation that this person is responsible for meeting my needs, I actually get to experience the what it's like if they're not available to meet my own needs, for example. So there's all of these different ways I think that you can think about or conceptualize this. But I do think you're right that like it isn't just about exchange, it's about meeting ourselves. And it is, I think, probably, I think you're hitting on the most, in my experience, the most complex and most nuanced aspect of relating. And I think it's also highly individual based on where you're at in any given moment and all of the experiences that have come before and what is right in that relationship for you and for both people. And there is a huge range of needs for a huge range of intensity with regard to the need for autonomy, for example, versus the need for safety. And they often feel like they're in conflict because of the strategies that we're using. But often, if we can get to the root need, then they cease to be in conflict. Now, I'll just be honest. I'm by no means an expert in moving from strategies to needs. I'm still mostly in strategy. And this lives mostly as a conceptual framework that's helping me to navigate and move through my own experience. But I actually really do agree with a lot of what you said just now. Yeah.
Yeah. Likewise. And I was also just, I'm speaking it from potentially the listener's perspective, right? Around, I think we've all probably had experiences with that on both ends of the spectrum around this person's not meeting my needs, or I'm responsible to meet all of this person's needs. This is what the relationship's about. And I think it leads us into what kind of where we're going next around trauma and safety. Mm-hmm. And we could even potentially pair those up as the same, right? Of like trauma baseline level is not feeling safe.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the answer to the overarching question kind of lives within the need and the strategy, and how do we go about the strategy, how familiar with the body sense and how to meet the need. And it's almost like you're speaking to autonomy. I'm almost curious if autonomy is a strategy for safety, the need of safety.
Oh yeah. I mean,
what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, now we're getting real deep now. We're in it. There's so much there that I want to unpack. Let me see if I can pull on the thread. First of all, I do think that autonomy I think it can be a strategy for safety. And I do also think that it's not all nurture. Like we come out of our mother's, womb different than our siblings if we have them. It's just, I haven't had the good fortune of having children, but my mom tells a story about how she used to have to, with my brother, she used to have to slap his hand away multiple times when he would try and stick his finger in the electrical socket, and he would just go, hey. And the first time that I went to go do that, she was like, Micah, no, and slapped my hand away. And I started bawling, crying. And there's just a fundamental difference in sensitivity. Like my being is just softer and sweeter, at least at that stage. He might have a different perception and he might think I'm a big asshole, although I have been an asshole to him. But in any case, that's a whole other podcast. But
looking forward to that.
Yeah. But all of that having been said, like one of the things that I so appreciated about the model that's offered in this book, Loving Conflict, is that needs are always valid. And when we actually say, okay, wow, this is a life-affirming, beautiful thing that's happening in this moment, and we don't make it wrong for ourselves or our partner, then the battle of like, do I get my needs met or do you get your needs met through this strategy starts to quiet down. And then as a pair of humans, you get to negotiate how are we going to show up for what one another needs? Or are we going to lovingly make the determination, actually, it's not in the best and highest good for us to continue to try and do that because we're not the people that are well equipped to meet one another's needs where they're at right now. And I think that making that determination is where doing the self-work in this question of do I stay or do I go comes in. And if the other person is available, doing the work with that person. And so just to be vulnerable, I'll share some of what's come up for me in this process. About 5 years ago, I had a unfortunately really toxic relationship. And between 4 and 5 years ago, it was 2 years on and off. I was a mess at the time. So this is not to lay the experience all at this other person's feet. And that having been said, I experienced a kind of emotional abuse. That's what I would consider it. And again, that's not to say that I wasn't engaged in my own form of the same because of my shit, but it left a really big mark on me emotionally. And I have become extremely sensitive to the way in which I'm communicated with. And what I mean by that is it really, really stings when I hear somebody say, you're being an asshole, or what the fuck is wrong with you? Or because so much of my experience in that relationship was her fear and her projections and her trauma getting dumped on me, and her misinterpreting my intentions, my reality, my communication in this profound way that left me getting constantly verbally attacked with a tremendous amount of force and anger. And now when I experience something that other people might be like, yeah, whatever, I don't give a fuck, like, yell at me, I don't care, it pokes at that wound that I have recently discovered I have some additional work to do around. And so there's a degree of sensitivity that I have and that I want in my communication, a certain quality of communication. Like I like so deeply desire somebody, in intimate relationship to say to me, hey, I notice I'm feeling angry, or I felt angry when you did blank. Can you tell me what was going on for you? What was happening? And then it gives me the opportunity to say, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, I am kind of being a dick. I'm really sorry. That was not okay. Or I can say, if what's true for me is I'm just being my usual loving self, that's not, my intention was totally pure. I'm sorry if it landed for you in a shitty way. What would you like differently from me that would be supportive? And that's like my particular need. Some couples are happy and they fucking bicker like cats and dogs. And it's just how they do that shit. And so like, if you're a guy like me, like maybe the spicy Latina is like not the choice, like it's just, maybe it's not the vibe. And, like everybody's got a different set of needs. And so part of this is like really deeply getting to know yourself and know, okay, I have some shit here. I have some shit here. I have some shit here, and being willing to work on and clean that up. And when you notice conflict that seems to repeat itself, really do the work to uncover what might be going on. And I know that's something that you are truly an expert in. And so I'd be curious to know, like, for people who are like, oh yeah, I do notice that I have these outsized reactions to certain things. How would a person start to unpack that for themselves, or how would a person, work with the information that their emotions and their body is giving them in challenging moments with their partner?
That's good, man. I agree and relate with a lot of what you're sharing. And I'll just kind of actually recap first that like the need that you're pointing at is the need for someone to be emotionally responsible and to own their experience versus like dumping it on you and making it like your problem. And I would like that just feels emotionally irresponsible to me. And so I think that the first thing is like the responsibility that we're taking in that is having a higher standard for who it is that we're willing to spend time with and share energy and intimacy with. And so that's like the boundary that I see us making for the parts of us that are tender. And then we have work to do there, right? And I think that's getting to know the parts of us that are tender, the parts of us that go into our own reaction around what's happening in our experience. And to, it's like getting curious, making requests. Like it's like I feel like you're demonstrating that right now. As if someone were to like come at you and be like, what the fuck were you thinking when you did this, that, and the other? There's like the adult that shows up and is like, okay, let's slow it down for a moment. Right. And it's like the awareness that there's something happening over there. There's probably something happening in here. I think that's probably the first tool, especially in a dynamic, is to like slow it down.
Yeah.
And then there's really so many things. There's all sorts of things that we can do to start to work with the part of us that's tender around like something like that, right? Someone who's like cutting into us in that way. Strangely enough, I've actually done some practice with that thing in relationship. And it sounds pretty strange, but the container that we would create would be based around us practicing actually giving each other some daggers to like learn how to like receive it in a softer way and to dissipate some of the charge so that there's a little bit more room for charge, and that there's like what I've noticed that happens for me in scenarios like that is I can either collapse into like, oh, I fucking did it wrong, or I'm not good, or I'm not enough, or whatever the thing is. And then another secondary reaction that might happen and be louder is I will get angry, right? I'll get pissed off, or I'll be like, it's the energy of like, nobody talks to me that way. And I think that that's healthy to some degree as well. But as long as I can see that happening within me and then go to the next step, which is let's slow it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to just briefly interject. So I think this is where I get fucked up, and I think most people get fucked up, that's a technical term, by the way, is being able to see that it's happening. So
Yes,
like the experience that I very frequently have is, partner, lover says some shit and it impacts me in some way that has a really big emotional charge in the body. And then I go what I would call unconscious, right? So like when I go to a restaurant and I'm thinking about ordering something on the menu, I'm calm. I can look at the menu. I can make a choice. And if you look practically, I think in every situation where we're navigating life, that's fundamentally what we're doing. There's a menu of choices. You make a choice. And when strong emotion comes into the picture, that menu of choices actually contracts, in my experience. So, and it's the what I would say not seeing it rather than seeing it that creates the contraction on the menu. So, how does one see it? Like, what are the skills that somebody needs to develop? Because I think maybe more than anything else, what I want to convey to people in this process is that if you're deciding to stay or to go, it is also about the other person, but it's also really, really important for you as a human being to clean up your side of the street so that your shit and their shit aren't like having babies, and creating this chaos. If you can get clean with yourself, then you can really start to get clarity with like, how is this other person actually being with me? And is the patterns that aren't meeting my needs after I've asked for them, after I've made the request, after I've shown up, like, are they still here? And are my needs continuing to go unmet? And then you can make a clear choice from a deeply centered place. But if we haven't yet sorted out our stuff, then it can be really unclear. So I think giving people tools to really deeply understand, like, how do I see it in the first place? And then how do I slow down? Those are the two things that I heard you say. So can you talk about, like, how do you see it?
I think the most important thing is to have a baseline, to be in relationship with our baseline, right? So having a baseline of a regulated nervous system can be, it can be, I find it to be more confusing when we're continuously dysregulated.
Got it.
It's hard to notice more dysregulation. Right. So if we have a healthy baseline of regulation and peace and ease, then when something shows up between us, it's easier to notice, like, oh, something stings, right? Like I feel something. Like I think that's also just a really epic thing to point out, is that something is happening. Something shifted. And if we can bring that into like awareness between us and our partner of like, even if I notice this can happen for me, even if I notice the other person's shutting down, I can start to shut down, or I can make it mean something about me, or da 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 da. And so it's like, what is our capacity to notice? Like, hey, I notice something's happening. What's like this is what I'm feeling. What are you feeling? And so I think there's a massive amount of self-responsibility in that, of like knowing my experience and then owning my experience.
And being able to communicate the experience that you're having.
And I would put communicate separate as like, because I've fallen into a trap of like, well, I don't know how to articulate this. I don't actually know what the fuck's happening. I don't know how to speak to it. But if we can, if articulation can be as simple as something's happening, can we slow it down? Or can we have some presence around this? Can you notice with me?
Yeah. I think this is really, really, really good. I think slowing it down is one of the things that is most difficult to do. Noticing and then slowing it down, because I think we get hijacked by our animal brains. And the animal brain says, oh God, this person that I love is upset with me. And because they're upset with me, I'm not safe, which is a very common experience. Or because they're upset, maybe not even with me, I'm not safe, which is an incredibly common experience for so many people to have had. In fact, I would say one of my favorite teachers, Adyashanti, says, growing up is a traumatic experience. And it's so fucking true. Like, it's just obviously true that you cannot become an adult without having experienced trauma. And most people, experience trauma with their parents or caregivers or close relationships, other traumas as well, which we won't get into, but and those particular traumas can make it incredibly difficult in precisely the moment when we most need to be able to communicate with grace and ease and softness, and to be trusting is when we feel least able. And so I think, like, in my own experience of relating, with my friendships and in my romantic exploration, I think the most important skill that I have cultivated or the two most important skills are being able to stay present enough that I am aware that I am having an experience that is too strong for me to be able to show up effectively in the way that I'm committed to. So body sensation, emotion is too much. And secondly, being able to communicate in a way that takes responsibility, like you were saying, for my own experience, meaning instead of, you really hurt my feelings just now because what you said was dickish. You're being a dick. Instead, it's, I notice I'm feeling hurt. I really didn't like how what you said felt for me. And it doesn't make the other person wrong. It doesn't blame them. It doesn't put it out there with them. It's my experience. And those two things have reduced the amount of conflict that I experience in relationship a lot. Unfortunately, what I'm discovering is that I'm not able to do them consistently. Or if I have the experience of the person that I am relating with not doing them, it really, really, really shuts me down. And so that's an area of skillfulness that I think, were I to focus on something and heal and develop, that would be where I would want to to develop more capability and more skill, to be able to receive, fuck you, you're an asshole. And for me to think, okay, they're having a moment. She's having a moment. I love her. She's hurting. I'm so sad she's hurting right now. How can I show up for her so that she can come out of this moment? And what it's making me think of, we touched on earlier, like, where is the self-responsibility and where is the mutuality? Where's the I'm committed also to loving you? So a number of years ago, I did a personal and professional development training with a group called Landmark. And one of the things that they said, somebody said, I don't remember, one of the trainers said is, if you want a relationship that works, both people need to be 100% responsible for the relationship. So what's coming up for me in this moment is, in that distinction between self-responsibility and mutuality, if I am 100% responsible for making sure, developing the skillfulness so that when I'm triggered, I still have enough awareness to be able to know, okay, I'm triggered. I'm not capable of the things that I'm usually capable of doing in terms of the quality of communication that I want to deliver. And number two, from that just barely aware place, being able to communicate that I'm having an experience in a way that's responsible for my own experience. Something like, I'm feeling like blank, or I don't even know what I'm feeling. I don't even know what I need. Right? That's like the lowest tier. Like, I'm feeling something, it's strong. I don't know what I need right now. I'm just letting you know so that we can take a pause. And like, getting skillful enough to be able to do that, if both people take 100% responsibility for that, and there's enough grace between the two of you that you can call each other forward in a hard moment, like, hey, I noticed that you're not being responsible for your experience right now. Are you available to do that with me? And on the other side, when we are triggered, when we are lost, when that fails, when plan A fails, being able and loving and willing enough to meet the other person's, I think the phrase that comes to mind is like temporary insanity. Like, we go insane a little bit when we're triggered, like that temporary insanity of being triggered, with enough awareness and love to be able to say, hey, I love this person. Whatever's coming at me is not mine to take on. It's not mine to defend. And I'm going to show up for it. And I think, like, this is a good heuristic too for people to help people to understand, like, do I stay or do I go? Are there two people in the relationship that are committed to that? And if there are, then and there's alignment, then the chances are that that you have a possibility of making it work. You have a possibility. And I think it's also really important to name that the trauma that has generated these kinds of behaviors, where we respond with irrational intensity to a given situation, still needs to be worked on and resolved. And that's also part of being responsible, is like, I got to keep cleaning up my side of the street. And it's, I think this is also the gift of intimate relating. Like, this is how we get free. We have a loving mirror that's clean enough that we get to see where we're amiss, and we get to offer that gift to them and love them through that mess. And it is ultimately a decision too, based on your own particular needs. You know, I think one of the things that I have, you know, that I am deeply considering as I go through this transition process around, you know, the partnership that I've been in for the last 6 months, is like, I notice I have a really strong need for someone to be able to consistently offer me that responsible communication and bring that awareness to their own experience, so that I'm not on the receiving end of projection or blame that isn't appropriate to the moment. And I have to decide for myself, like, what am I willing to accept? What's right for me? You know, how do I honor my own needs in this moment? And, you know, which are very high for sensitivity and peaceful, nonviolent communication. It doesn't make it right or wrong. just makes it my needs.
I think it's beautiful. And there's a tall standard to invite in for that. And I feel similar. Yeah, I like how you named it. Was it like irrational intensity? My irrational intensity.
Temporary insanity.
Temporary insanity. Use irrational. Let's use the other one too, I think. But I think that there's such a huge thing to when, like, you pointed to like having someone as a mirror. And what I notice is one of the challenge, it's like a challenge and a solution. I'm not exactly sure how to be with it, but it seems like there's really only room for one person's trigger at a time. And
yeah.
And or it's like, if that's the case, if both of us are like massively triggered and either of us can get lucid in this moment, then let's, either compartmentalize and do something else for a minute, or let's take space or go for a walk. Let's break the energy. And yeah, and it's like how what seems true to me is someone's trigger doesn't actually have anything to do with me. It mostly has to do with everything that's happened before me.
Right.
And if I can recognize that in the moment and show up with compassion, curiosity, and love, where in the past I've showed up with a lot of resistance or defensiveness, and that doesn't work. So compassion and curiosity, and then at the same time take responsibility. What I hear you say is take responsibility for the other end too. Like that's how I feel like I'm taking responsibility. And then there's another edge of that is like also taking responsibility for what I need in terms of how am I communicated to about that.
Yeah.
And it might not be front and center, right? But the first one might be compassion of like, got you, I hear you. Let's just be with that for a moment. How does it feel? What are you needing? Those types of things. And then like within the clarity of it, I think there's area to speak into. What would feel really good for me is the next time that shows up, if we can try something. And I think that's also a really beautiful context of all of this. Something that I think is so important is when we get into these like trigger locks, these continual looping of like, this person does this and it does this to me, or it's like whatever the dynamic is like, how can we, and with potentially a third party, name the dynamic? Like, here, this isn't you or me. It's a we thing. And there's a dynamic that I notice that happens between us. Can we create some space around that dynamic? Can we start to consciously unwind the dynamic? Can we at least have some visibility on this? So the next time it shows up, we know what's actually happening, because we can lose contact in those moments. So, I mean, I think that's a big question in terms of like, do I stay or do I go? Are we actually voicing the dynamic of what we're noticing is showing up in the relationship?
Yeah. And I think that can be one of the hardest things, because in that moment of going unconscious or in our temporary insanity of feeling hurt, distressed, triggered, etc., we can dissociate, we can lose information, we can have a hard time remembering even where it started, how it started. And so it can be really tricky to actually figure out like what is happening. And sometimes the the space is what's needed, in this partnership that I'm navigating uncertainty in. It wasn't until we took some space that I was able to actually begin to see where we stopped the cycle of being triggered by generating space, that I was able to see what was happening for me, why I was feeling how I was feeling, why it felt so uncomfortable and difficult, why I felt so hurt and so disappointed and so let down. And and then actually got in contact with my own needs in a way that I really hadn't before. So it is a tricky process. I think it is also a difficult question to answer, because I don't know about you, but it took me, I think, how many years was it? Just doing some quick math. It took me 5 years from the time that I realized that I was addicted to pornography to quit watching pornography. Like, knowing that there is a problem doesn't mean that the problem magically goes away. And particularly with these relational things, where there's this deeply rooted trauma that underpins it. Sometimes it's complex PTSD because it was, stuff that was happening again and again and again in our home environment when we were little. These patterns run so fucking deep because they were the adaptive way that we found safety back then. And so one of the things that I think I just want to say to people is like, man, if you get to the place where you see, okay, here's my trauma, here's their trauma, here's what we're doing wrong, hallelujah, praise Jesus. That's amazing. And be clear-eyed about the fact that it may take time and energy and deep, emotional resource for both of you to go on the journey of generating resolution individually and together, and that the pattern may continue to play itself out in the meantime, even when there is awareness of it. And there's no right or wrong decision. It's just bringing clarity to the fact that, okay, you got to think about this decision, because it's a big one. And no one can answer it for you. But I think the underlying lesson is handle your trauma, ask for your partner to do the same, and get responsible for a practice that gives you more space between your thoughts and feelings and emotions, and your action, something like meditation or, meditation, or possibly even meditation. Go fucking meditate. That's my opinion. And get responsible for your communication and develop your capacity to be with another person's upset. And those are all just degrees of skillfulness. And I think the more that we've done our own work and cleared out our own past, our own history, what happened when we were little ones that never got resolved, the better chance that we will have for being able to show up with the ability to offer grace for another person's distress and upset. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Micah, we were talking about the other day, this, what you're saying here, I believe is going to show up in any relationship, right? There's going to be some level of unwinding, some level of trigger, some type of dynamic that's happening, some pattern that we're seeing within ourselves. It's like what I hear you saying is like, that's such a beautiful thing to notice, to realize. More conscious awareness we can bring to that, the better. And we were having a conversation the other day talking about like, to what extent is that happening on each side of the relationship, and how does that kind of like impact our decision staying in it or moving forward?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's such an important question. And I don't think that there's truly any right answer. I think some people genuinely want a relationship where they get to be exactly how they are right now, today, and they never have to grow. And they want cruise mode. And some people are like, the person I am today looks nothing like the person I was 5 years ago. And that person looked nothing like the person that I was 5 years before that. And I am committed to growth and change and evolution as a human being. And the decision to stay or to go, I think around this piece really centers around, there are kind of, I think, two distinct needs, right? One is, what's the person's long-term commitment? And where are they at right now? And I think the long-term commitment is pretty simple to answer. Like, yo, are we on this train? Like, cool, we're on the train together, we're doing it. On the other hand, where is this person at right now relative to where I feel like I need them to be with these skill sets in order to feel safe and to feel willing, is just it's a totally subjective thing. Like, I don't think there's any right way to answer that question. But what I can say from my own experience is that whenever I haven't felt met in that way, what I notice over time is that, and this is my shit to work out, my thing to be responsible for, I notice that I keep giving of myself in order to be the source of stability or the source of the source of like managing challenging emotional experiences. Not all the time. I'm a mess too. And this is totally my perception. So if you put a camera on it, like, the reality might look totally different. So I just want to acknowledge that, once again, I'm insane, and I know that I'm insane. But my experience is that I'm like offering and offering and offering and offering, you know, if I don't feel fully met in this way. And when I don't feel like it comes back to me in the way that I deeply desire or crave, I have the experience of like my battery getting drained just a little bit more and 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 a little bit more. And then eventually the battery taps out and I got nothing left to give. And that feels awful, because it's the experience of really, really loving another person and wanting to show up for them, but just no longer having either the inner resource or the trust that doing so will actually make the difference that I want it to. Yeah. So it's a hard place. I think, like knowing how important this is, or deciding how important this is
it's a deeply personal choice, but my experience is that having someone that can navigate this with skillfulness is, it's like foundational to everything else for me.
Yeah.
I'm curious how that lands for you, and how you feel in that way.
I think just my reflection is that it's like it doesn't matter so much about what's happening or what the challenge is, but if someone has the skill sets of being with themselves, taking responsibility, and knowing how to talk about it in a way that is responsible for themselves and the other people involved, is just a huge advantage. It's massive.
Yeah. It creates a night and day experience. And actually, like, my friends, the people that know me, who are close to me, especially the ones that have navigated deep challenge, will tell you that I actually really, really love showing up for
the people that I care about and love when they're having a hard time. In fact, perhaps to a fault. And so there's no part of me that like isn't available to show up for my partner when they're going through a hard moment and offering what it is that they need. It's really just that I want to feel like we're in it together, and I'm not, like, I'm not the only one. That's committed to showing up with a certain way of being and a certain way of communicating. And it's never true that one person is the only one that's doing the work. Like, that's almost never the case. So I don't want to, imply that about any of my past partners, but like, that's the feeling. It feels very like lonely and isolating when I don't feel met in this way. And it's, I think your point is exactly right. Like, it makes it so much more joyful and beautiful to be able to give the other person, and these, like, usually these younger parts that have a wound that didn't get what they needed when, all those years ago, like, to be able to show up for that, like, tender part of a person that we love. Like, what a gift to be able to give. And it's something that I so want to do. I just want my fucking crew of parts to feel safe when I do it, And one of the things too that Max has said to me directly in a session is, like, when you're in one of those parts, you got to figure out how to expand and unmerge with the little one that's overwhelmed and become your adult self again. And I think thematically, that's what this is all about. Like, what this is all about is adulting in relationship. Like, can you bring your adult self into the experience in every moment? Can you develop the skill to bring your adult self into the experience at every moment? And if you do that and your partner does that, then I feel like if there's alignment, you can navigate almost anything, and build a relationship that lasts.
Yeah, I agree, man. And I relate to you, where in the past I've played the parts of, like, showing up, and I'm curious, what people think when they listen to this, because it feels like it might also be a polarity type thing, where I've been hurt in the past really badly when, I've been in that repetitive pattern of showing up. And then there is, like, a piece of me that is really needing some level of just tender love and attunement. And then I ask for that. And then it throws off the whole polarity of the relationship.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, now I'm not respected for the next week and a half, or like, you know, there needs to be
Yeah.
something that happens. And it's so interesting. So yeah, it's a really, really interesting piece. I think what we're talking about is the solution, and especially our own ownership and unmerging with our own parts, learning how to advocate for our parts. And I personally know that I have work to do there and advocating for my own parts. Like,
Same. Oh my God.
And I think we're on a really good path, and like us as buddies, we're like good at reflecting to each other where, and like, yeah, not giving you like harsh feedback on where I think that you've got room to be aware of where you're showing up or how you're showing up, but just like a gentle nudge or curiosity around what that's like for you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that lands like a ton of bricks. This point about needing to learn to advocate for myself. Like one thing that I'm learning, and this is pervasive in my relationships, romantic or otherwise, is that one of the patterns that I can run is if I show up for you for whatever your needs are, then I know I'm safe because you need me. And that way of being leaves no space in my internalized insane model for me to say, hey, wait a second, actually, I have needs too. And for me right now, they're actually more important than meeting your needs. And so like you, I have work to do around learning that it is safe to say no, safe to ask for what I need, safe to like, you know, safe to acknowledge that I might be hurt. Like there's a whole world of like, I think my big challenge is being cut off from it many times and not communicating the experience that I'm having because I'm afraid that to do so would lead to a loss of love or loss of intimacy or connection for a variety of reasons. And that's my own like place to grow, you know? That's my own shit. So yeah, we're just a work in progress, figuring it out. So, okay. Do we feel like we...
I want to throw in something here. This is really interesting. So I wish I knew this lady's name. I think it's Annie. Another kind of famous relationship love coach.
Some love broad. You know,
somebody.
Some lady that does...
She's somebody.
Hey, she's not as good as us, but she's all right. Tell us more about Annie. She was
at my house the other night at like kind of a dinner party situation, and I'd seen her on Instagram prior to meeting her. So I was like, "Do I know who you are?" And then so I told her about all my problems, and I asked her to help me. And
what'd she say? What'd she say? Give us the clips.
She said a couple of interesting things. She used language that I really liked. So I'm looking for a partnership and lovership. And she was like, "Are you dockable? Do you have, you know, like, are you dockable? Are you actually available for a relationship? Does your, you know, is your energetic? Is your lifestyle? Is it compatible with that desire of yours?" So that was one thing. And then I told her about this like thing, and wow, it feels vulnerable, but it's exactly what we're talking about, is like a fear of being with a woman who's not actually emotional, that she doesn't have emotional availability. And what I believe is aligned for me, my next level of growth is to be with a woman who's got emotional availability that I feel safe enough with, that is going to allow for my shit to come up in a way that's safe enough to be processed with another person. And I don't want the relationship to be about that, of course, but I'm like, oh, that would be amazing, right? Is like if someone was actually attuned and capable enough to hold me in a deep, powerful way. And she was basically saying, well, that's why you can't find the person, because the parts of you that are like, that you can acknowledge need that, they don't want that. So you're gonna, it's gonna be hard to find that. Does that make sense?
No.
Like,
I mean, maybe it does, but I'm not tracking.
Yeah. There's like, there are parts of me that are in resistance to being emotionally vulnerable. And so my manager protectors are going to avoid those women because then it's going to rewrite the story of my subconscious. Gotcha. And my subconscious likes to be right. So,
yes.
Yeah. You know that one.
Yeah.
And so, part of the advice that she gave me, which was really interesting, and she's like, don't go for the 10s. She's like, go for neutral attraction.
Can you say more about that? What was the intention with that?
Well, she's like I think she was saying that high attraction may have something to do with a trauma bond.
Yes.
Right? Like there's a lot of charge there. It wants to explode. Like that is, that's not exactly what I'm looking for. And she had some cool quotes. What I'm looking for is a sanctuary for my heart and a trampoline for my dharma. Which I like those. Yeah.
Damn, why'd you wait? Why'd you wait until the end, near the end, to fucking
to lay the magic in?
Yeah, that's a B-roll right there. What I'm looking for is a sanctuary for my heart and a trampoline for my dharma.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah, Annie, whoever.
We stole the quote from somebody else. Yeah, I find that really interesting, and I'm looking at neutral attraction and getting curious about that. I know.
Well, let me know how your dick feels about that. I'm wondering. I'm wondering. I got to move this mic. Hang on one second. Yeah, I'm wondering how your dick is going to feel about the neutral attraction idea. That's an approach that I hadn't considered. Yeah.
Well, it's go ahead.
Well, one thing that I think actually does stand out to me, I was thinking about this a couple of days ago. It's this idea that this is a sort of tangent, but I think a relevant one for men in particular and women to the extent that they watch pornography. I think for many people in today's society, and this was true for me when I used to watch pornography, use it as a way to regulate their nervous system. So when they're dysregulated, when they're anxious, when they're sad, when they're angry, when they're afraid, when they're overwhelmed, they would watch pornography, or I would watch pornography, and as a way to get my nervous system back into a regulated state, because the arousal and ejaculation process moves you through an arc of sympathetic way down into parasympathetic when you get aroused, then a big sympathetic spike, and then an even dropper into parasympathetic post-orgasm. So you can move from a sympathetic state, an activated state, into a like relaxed state by watching and by having an orgasm. That's why it's a great stress reliever. But when you do it with pornography, I think actually one of the things that happens is we wire up sexual arousal to being dysregulated. Or said differently, we are attracted to people around whom we feel dysregulated, around whom we don't feel safe, and then enter into a trauma bond that is naturally going to bring up, trauma. If you do it consciously and both people are good, loving people, then there's a lot of alchemy that's possible. But a lot of times that is not the case. I mean, and what's been really fascinating for me is to just notice that since I have stopped watching pornography and my relationship to sex is changing progressively. I stopped not quite a year and a half ago, and my sexuality is just it feels so different. And, I noticed the attraction is different too for me. And I think it's kind of related to this. So maybe that's kind of something that she's pointing at, or something that is linked. I feel like we're kind of off in the weeds now. I think we've covered the topic. I think I think this is a really good first episode. And what I would like to do is kind of just put a pin in it and wrap it up for people. Like, it's really simple. It's simple, but not easy. Understand your needs and the needs of the person that you are looking at partnership with or deep connection with, and make sure they're a match. Once you've done that, in the real world of your relationship, see if you guys can show up for one another's needs in the way that you deeply desire. And if you can't, look at, am I being responsible for my own emotional experience? Am I staying aware when I'm triggered? And have I done my work to heal the trauma that is resulting in these triggers or these conflicts? And is my partner doing those things at the level that I need for myself? And am I willing to go through this crucible if it's hard, and it's likely that there's work to do, to see what's possible on the other side? Those are really the steps that you have to take, and no one can give you an answer. It's not simple. Or it's simple, but it's not easy. It requires work and willingness from yourself and from your the human being that you love.
Epic, brother.
Any last thoughts?
Well said.
Any last thoughts to add?
No, man. I think you covered it. I think that was a really nice summary.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this episode valuable, there are 2 easy ways to support the podcast. First, simply subscribe to this podcast or channel on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. And second, please share this episode with a loved one or a friend or someone who would be positively impacted by it. Thank you so much once again, and see you soon.